And we are live. I'm joined today with Top Leaf Media. How you doing today, my friend?
I'm excellent, thanks. How are you?
Doing very well, thank you. So today we're going to be discussing about the BC-Alberta trade war. I'm joined today with Top Leaf... Huh, that was weird.
Yep. Yeah, sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. So we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about Justin Trudeau because I know there's been a lot going on since his trip to India.
Oh boy.
And then we're going to be talking a little bit about cannabis as well. So I was thinking that which one do you want to start off with today? Which subject's your baby today?
I've been really into the whole trade war pipeline deal lately, so I wouldn't mind starting there.
Alrighty, well, let's do it then. So as I was looking through, this is all due to the Kinder Morgan pipeline, the Trans Mountain pipeline that is worth $7.4 billion.
Yes.
And as far as we've heard, there's been a lot of debate in there. There's been a lot of talks. There's been a lot of research. And then finally, the project was ready to go ahead. And then it was the BC government that ended up putting the brakes on that because of environmental issues, eh?
Yeah, so the BC just got a new NDP government. And so the Trudeau government actually approved the pipeline in late 2016 before the NDP had gotten into power in British Columbia. And the NDP petitioned heavily on no pipelines. They're very, very environmental forward. And it's for both federal NDP and British Columbia NDP, pipelines aren't really much of an issue for them. They don't want pipelines. So the BC NDP has been doing everything in their power to just completely kill this pipeline deal with red tape. We've seen a lot of outcry from Burnaby, which is a municipality, kind of a suburb in Vancouver, and there have been a number of municipal laws that have not been followed by Kinder Morgan. So they've been pushing back against the pipeline through that. It's looking like the pipeline it's going to go through, right? Federal government has all discretion for that. And what John Horgan does, the BC premier, he wants to appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada against this pipeline, saying that there is not nearly the amount of environmental regulations that there needs to be, and just we need to pump the brakes on it a bit. So my main qualm with this is the National Energy Board approved it, right? And they are very pro-industry, right? You hear National Energy Board and you kind of think, oh, well, that should be a nonpartisan view of energy in Canada. But they are very, very pro-industry, very pro-pipeline. So there's been a lot of criticism toward them, saying that they just want to push this through no matter what the consequences are. There are certain Indigenous groups that have begun to actually build houses on the proposed pipeline route because it's their territory, as it were, right? So they want to start developing on the route of the pipeline to hold back further development. And this is really interesting. There was a study done that shows 1 in 10 British Columbians who are against the pipeline will be willing to break the law to just be against the pipeline, whether that's violence or it's just protests. Hopefully it's not going to resort to violence. But 1 in 10 British Columbian citizens who oppose the pipeline are willing to break the law in order for the pipeline not to happen.
So it sounds like environmentalism is really extreme over there. Well, I do know that also on top of that, we for your NDP government, it's sort of a coalition, eh? You got the NDP and then you got 3 Green Party MLAs.
3 Greens, yeah.
So they definitely hold a big sway over that, because I know that without those 3 votes for the NDP, then they could easily turn to the Liberals or any other party. So I do know they hold a lot of sway in there. So I figured that they are probably the ones that are probably pushing the environmentalism more than anything. However, I do think that that's a little bit of startling number, though, considering 1 in 10 are prepared to do this, because in the past, when we've seen, I would say the Keystone XL pipeline that was going on in the United States, that was a real contentious issue. So I do think, and especially when it comes to Indigenous groups, we always see a lot of pushback. So as far as this goes, I think we can see some sort of violent protesting in the future. However, the thing we got to take into consideration too is that oil is one of our main commodities, especially for Alberta. A lot of their economy relies on oil. And I have heard too that the one problem that the BC government was having was the fact that it was unconstitutional for them to actually tell Alberta that the oil couldn't flow into BC.
Yeah, precisely. So there's a bit of a stipulation that says individual provinces cannot ban the movement of goods and services through their province. What was that, sorry?
Oh, just for a second, you cut out just there for a second.
Okay. Yeah, so it is unconstitutional. There's no and or ifs, buts about it. It is unconstitutional. But I think the main reason we're seeing this is just because there was such a shift in how BC is governed, right? We went from the Liberal Party, who is basically a center-right party, right? They're not actually liberals. They're more aligned with conservatives.
Are they actually?
Yeah, far more.
Shit, they're not.
Yeah, we don't have a conservative party in BC here. It's called the BC Liberals, but for all intents and purposes, it is a conservative party.
Okay.
So yeah, they've been heavily into industry, very, very pro pipeline, but now we're seeing the polar opposite, right? And so they believe that the deal was made prior to them being in office. So they think they have a chance at appealing and saying, hey, these are our qualms here. Hear us out. I doubt that this is even going to go to court. I don't think we're going to see an appeal. I think that this project has been approved for almost 2 full years now. So I don't see that reasonably happening. I don't think that the government is going to put a kibosh on it, but I could see the potential for escalation in activist groups, which ideally I don't want to see, but it is what it is, right?
True. And yeah, definitely, even though when Trudeau was running in 2015, he said he was against the pipelines, he's more or less proved that he is pro-pipeline. I don't know if there's really been much that he's put the brakes on.
One that comes to mind is the Energy East pipeline, which
that's true.
I would much prefer an Energy East pipeline that goes to the Maritime provinces versus the Trans Mountain pipeline, which goes to Vancouver. Because if you look at what the plan was for the Energy East pipeline, it was to take raw crude over to the Maritime provinces where it could be refined and then either sold globally or within the country. But this Trans Mountain pipeline, it's all for global exports. So we're not refining a lot of the oil. We're not using it. We might sell it to China, have them refine it, and then buy it back for exorbitant prices. But the money's not staying in Canada. And one of my main issues with the Trans Mountain pipeline is the Conservatives have been saying, oh, it's going to create thousands of jobs for Canadians. But none of those jobs are long-term sustainable jobs. So I think the number was 3,500 jobs going into building the pipeline, and that's going to be a 5-year project, and then those jobs disappear. Versus if we were to refine the oil in Canada, especially out in the Maritimes, because they've been having a hard go of things economically lately, right? So if we were to ship the oil there, people refine it there, and then we distribute it through Canada, we're going to see lower oil prices, and we're going to see overall more economic viability for Canada instead of just shipping it out to China.
Well, 2 things about that is the first one is a lot of our oil, I've come to realize, we even import it. And I don't understand why. Like Saudi Arabia, we buy a lot of oil from. And when we're so rich on our own oil, we shouldn't be doing that. And in terms of the Energy East pipeline, which I also kind of pissed me off when about that one, again, I forgot about it till you mentioned it, was the fact that Quebec put the brakes on that because they were concerned about it passing through their province. Yet it was, again, it would be the Maritimes who would benefit if the pipeline went all the way to the east, over to the east. And Quebec put the brakes on that, not giving the jobs available to the Maritimes, while at the same time, Quebec takes the majority of equalization payments between the provinces. So I thought that was a little ironic, a little hypocritical that they were willing to stop another province, another few provinces, from having a better standard of living. And at the same time, they're taking money from everybody else.
Yeah, well, that's a real piss off, because if you look at the equalization, like a majority of the funds are coming from Alberta, and that's just been possible because they've been so successful through the oil fields. But what you're seeing now is just people being laid off left, right, and center out there. And so they're knocking, and especially with this new NDP government, they're trying to implement a lot more social programs. So a lot more of the overall profits that the province would see would not be going to equalization payments. It would be going more into social programs in Alberta. Whereas you look, when they had a conservative government for the past, I don't know how many decades, all of that money was going to be redistributed through the country. And so for Quebec, who does take the majority of equalization payments, for them to just completely put a kibosh on that, it's ridiculous. It's so counterintuitive to what they want.
I mean, I have family that are from Quebec, and like even my father was born in Quebec, but I get a little tired of this whole notion of a nation within a nation, because at the end of the day, we're all living in the same country. And what happened, like, I'm sure they're still pissed off about, like, you know, what happened on the plains of the Battle of Abraham Plains and everything, but that was hundreds of years ago. I think we're past the time where we just need to move on. Although I do know that they're worried, they want to keep their culture in place, but yada yada yada.
Yeah, sure. I'm very very pro Quebec separatism, to be honest with you. They can get out of the nation for all I care.
Well, the last time that they were suggesting such a thing was I was taking a look over what they wanted. And, well, number one, if they left, they'd be giving up all their equalization payments. So that's the first. Then they wanted to continue using the loonie as their currency and wanted a seat on the Bank of Canada. And they're acting like this is completely fair. Like, yeah, why can't we do this? It's like, well, by now you're a different country. On top of that, a lot of Quebec is, especially in the north, is native land, which means that that wouldn't be getting taken with them. And I'm sure some agreements would be made, because like technically government buildings would be federal land, and I'm sure some agreements would be made to give them that. But the way I see it, it would just be patches of Quebec in the middle of Canada if they were actually to separate.
Yeah, it'd be kind of bizarre, but you know, I'm not too happy with all their preaching to the rest of the nation, right? So.
Now, oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
Oh, I was just going to say, because you were talking just a minute ago about how the previous conservative government of Alberta, they ended up using all the money that they made went to equalization payments, and then when Notley came in, she went more to social programs. Do you actually think that this was probably the better move for Alberta because of that, since the money seems to be at least staying in the province rather than getting moved around the country?
I mean, empirically, I'm going to have to say no, just because of how Alberta has been since Notley has gotten in economically for individuals. In my own philosophy, I generally lean more towards the free market rather than social programs. I don't know. I can't say I really support Notley and the NDP government.
I definitely wouldn't say that I support her either, but I was just wondering, as somebody more on the West Coast, if you maybe saw that as an advantage. But yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm definitely more towards the free market, and even just like some of the social programs. Like the first one to fall for me was welfare. And this was because I had a friend for a little bit of time that when I met him, he was on welfare, and I thought he was just going through a hard time.
Yeah.
But years went on, and maybe the most job he had was for like 2 weeks, and he always complained about his life sucked, but then he would just wait for the next welfare check. So that was, for me, was the first social program that I saw as the problem.
Yeah.
And from there, they just fell like dominoes. I was like, well, then we should be using charities instead, and we shouldn't be doing this, and we shouldn't be doing that. And that was how I made my transition to the right. Actually, it was more of an economical transition than anything.
Yeah, no, I'm in the same boat with you. Welfare is a tricky one, right? I think I do think that Pogie has helped a lot of people who are in between jobs. But I really think when it comes down to it, if you're completely sustained by welfare for over 3 years, man, it can't be good for your soul. It really can. And I think it is a bit of a welfare trap, especially once you get these. I know this isn't super big in Canada, but I know in certain areas in the United States, there are multi-generational families that are just completely based on welfare, right? And I think that is it just kills your economic libido. And so I don't know. I think welfare does have its use. I'd be hesitant in completely abolishing any sort of social security, but I do think it is being abused and not used for the intentional purposes. I'd much rather have strong communities that look out for one another voluntarily, rather than it being a just being everyone being taxed and then given to other people. Because then if you have strong community bonds and someone isn't pulling, like, you can help someone who's fallen on hard times, right? But if they're not pulling their weight and they're completely relying on the community for years and years, you can just say, all right, man, you know, we've tried to help you. You're not getting your, you know what, together. So we're going to have to stop aiding you.
Well, in the past, this always seemed to be the more effective way. Social ostracization was a big one back in the past. And this seemed to be one of the ways that people would, it would influence people's decision and how they acted. A good example of this, while it's not related to welfare, but in ancient Greece, in the Spartans, if you weren't willing to fight for your city, then you were seen as a trembler and you were ostracized by the community. And while this could have negative effects, like I'm sure it led people to depression and suicide, I found also more often than not, it gave people the opposite drive. And that when they were being ostracized, they were more willing to become a more productive member of society. So I'm with you that I wouldn't want a complete abolishment of all social programs. But one thing I could definitely see, for instance, the welfare that would need to be reformed was the guy I was talking about. Even though he was on welfare for all this time, he had to send away to his welfare officer or whoever they are. He had to send away to him that he was still looking for jobs. You know, he said, I applied here, I applied there. And he did that every couple months or so. I think it was every 3 months he had to do that over the entire 3 or 4 years that I knew him. And it never once did he ever get questioned as to why he hadn't found a job or barely could keep a job in 4 years. So something like that, I would like to see some reformation of, I think.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you. And it seems weird to me that people can go for a year or more without having a job. Like, how difficult is it to get a job? I've never had any sort of issue in finding work. It's always, I've moved around a bit in the past few years, and it's always been within a month of me moving, I've found work, even if it's just basic, you know, you're working in a grocery store or fast food. It's easy to get entry-level jobs. Or if you have a few skills, you can go for a labor position, like a bricklayer or something. So I don't really get it when people say, oh yeah, I've been looking for a job, I just can't find one. Sure, there are a lot of places where there's not a lot of prosperity and there's not too many job options available. But as a whole, much of Canada is abundant in these jobs. I know major metropolitan areas like Vancouver and Toronto, there's not enough people to fill all the job positions. So I don't understand how we can square the circle of people just taking an abundance of welfare when there are all these jobs available.
And I understand if it's something we're talking about the Maritimes, it's difficult to find a job. There's very few jobs over there right now. But even where I live, like I'm in the capital, I'm in Ottawa, and this is all completely coming from my personal experience, so it's all subjective. But one job I used to work for was for a manufacturing job, and it was a lot of work just because if things fell behind, you could be stuck doing overtime, or you have to make up for something that maybe the day staff fell behind on, because I was working nights at the time. And it was hard to get people to stay and do the job, even though it wasn't bad. It offered good benefits. The pay was a couple dollars above the minimum wage. And I guess I just kind of started to notice, as we had so many people come and go, it was the certain attitude of people. There was, for people who were there to do the job and support their families, they had a reason to be there. They were willing to put up with the crap for this good job and these good benefits. But a lot of, especially I would say, at least they were a lot of younger guys around my age and maybe a little bit younger. Those were the ones that would come in, realize it required a bit of elbow grease, and then they started backing out and were like, I don't want to do this. They'd be there for a day and then wouldn't show up, maybe 2 days, then they would leave. So I really think for a lot of people, it's a work ethic these days. A lot of people just don't have the same drive and work ethic, or they want that job, that good job that they can just right out of high school or right out of college, they want to jump into it, and then that's their career that they stay at and they love their job. I think a lot of ways we've put this idea of a career in people's minds, that a career is just going to be completely fulfilling, even though in the end it's just a job that keeps you keep the roof over your head.
Yeah, precisely. And if you look at it, the 2 times in a man's life where he's most likely to go out and be a go-getter is right after getting married and right after having his first kid. So obviously there's some personal, how do I put this?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, there's just, there's personal factors that are going to influence people to work harder, right? I think a lot of this has to do with, I don't think we're seeing as many young people getting out and just having very entry-level jobs when they're 14, 15, 16, right? And I think that's really good for teenagers, right? Because it gives you a sense of what you need to do in the real world. It at least starts your economic prowess, right? You know what's expected of you in a job. Whereas if you see these people who graduate from high school, then they go straight to college, they take out a whole bunch of student loans, they've never worked a day in their life, and they're just completely ill-prepared for the job market, even if they have done 4, 5, 6 years of schooling afterwards, because they've never actually gone out and had a job.
I don't know if you ever watched the comedian George Carlin, but he's one of my favorites. And he had a great joke where he's talking about a lot of people these days, they don't realize they're a loser until their boss comes storming into their office and say, clean out your fucking desk and get the fuck out. You're a fucking loser. And that is part of the problem, is that I would say I've noticed that with people too, is newer people that come in the workforce, they start getting crap from their boss because of something, and then they take it as a personal offense, which I understand that things like that can upset you, but I've noticed that it's actually affecting personal relationships. Like, my boss has given me crap for things before, and I might be a little pissed off the rest of the day. But when the next day you come in, it's back to square one. We're starting fresh. But a lot of people don't want to do that, and they just want this. Again, a lot of younger people don't want to do this, and I just find that they're looking for that perfect job, and they want to be treated like, well, I guess it's kind of the way that schools treat you, because school kind of just, they take you by the hand and they lead you all the way through. So I think for a lot of them, that's what they think their workplace is going to be, even though it's completely opposite. Because I did that too, what you were talking about. I was 15. I think I was like 2 weeks into becoming 15, which is, at least in Ontario, the legal limit to get a job. And I started working at Tim Hortons, and I spent the next 5 years working there until I upgraded to that manufacturing job that was better. And for me, that was actually kind of a lesson in capitalism in and of itself. I realized that it's like, well, it's the steady progression upwards. You're not going to start off somewhere great and then just jump up, but you actually have to work your way up to better jobs. It's all about the personal responsibility of going out and doing the job well.
Yeah, of course. And this is a bit of a cliche, I suppose, but it is really satisfying getting home after a good, honest days of hard work. It is a really satisfying feeling. And obviously it sucks to get chewed out, right? Like, it's not ideal. I've been chewed out at work a few times, and it sucks. And I think there's 2 ways you can go from there. You can either get all pissed off and you can get all mopey. Well, clearly it's not my fault. My boss just doesn't understand, he doesn't get it. Or you can say, you know what? Yeah, there's some certain spots where I've been lacking at work, and maybe I need to pick it up. And then I think the difference between a good employee and a bad employee is the good employee will take that as it is and maybe go out and ask, all right, so what exactly am I doing wrong? How can I improve? What are some ways I can do the job better so we're all happy at the end of the day, right? And I think people with that sort of drive are a lot more likely to just go farther in life, right? Because they're willing to take the extra couple steps that it takes to climb the hierarchy. So I don't know, we're at a very weird place in our society where I think a lot of the younger generation has just been babied so much by their parents, like how sheltered everyone is right now, right? And I think that's a big cause of all these social justice warriors, right? They've never really been told things that don't align with their worldview. They've just been sheltered their whole life, and that's why we're seeing safe spaces where they have pillows and videos of dogs everywhere because something conflicted with their own opinion. But I don't know. It's a very interesting cultural shift we're seeing.
I think one thing that I've always said that I was so happy my dad did with me was I think I was about 9 at the time, maybe about 10. It was one of my last years I played house league soccer, and we did terrible in this tournament. You know, like we like out of like the 8 teams, we came in like 8th or 7th or something. But at the end of the game, whoever put the tournament together, they came out and they handed each and every one of us a medal. And I was sitting there all confused, you know. I'm like, why did we get a medal? We did terribly. So I go up to my coach. I'm like, what's this? You know, like, what do we get it for? And he told me, it's like, well, you participated, you know, you get a medal for it. So it was my first participation medal. Yeah. And then after that, my dad, went over to see my dad. He asked what it was. I told him, and we're driving home at the end. He's like, you know, I was like, I'm glad you got that and everything, but I hope you realize though that it's just because you played, you didn't earn the medal and sort of thing. And, you know, even at the time, because you get a medal, you're happy you have, and you're like 9. It was kind of like a piss off to hear that, but it did me a lot of good in the long run, because I would say like within a year or two, I really realized the dangers of participation medals and just participation awards. I mean, fuck, even in my college, they'll give out attendance awards for just being in class, like the bare minimum you could do, and they're giving you an award for that.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm like in college, like I got that, like I got an attendance award in high school, and all I did was show up to school. But I couldn't believe when they are actually in college and university, they were starting to use those. And in regards of the safe spaces, actually my favorite thing they do is those stress relieving coloring books that they have.
Oh my God. It's farcical. It's absolutely farcical. It's just so ridiculous. I don't understand it. How are these going to be the future adults of tomorrow? Like, Jesus Christ, these kids are already like 22 years old and they have coloring books if they get triggered. Like, man, we're setting them up for failure there.
Yeah, seriously, we are. It's unbelievable. I was thinking though that maybe we should move on and talk a little bit about Justin Trudeau, because there's been a lot in that one the last few days. I'm sure you've been seeing the videos and the pictures since he went to India.
Oh, pictures galore. My goodness. He looks so good in that traditional Indian garb. I could not see how this trip just wasn't an amazing occasion for bettering India and Canada's relations. I mean, he was so sensitive to their culture. He was so embracing of it. And he even brought along one of our own celebrity chefs to help Indian people cook real Indian food. He's just, he's so bae. Daddy Trudeau. I love him.
He's super woke.
So woke.
Actually, I think my favorite thing, hold on, I'm going to see if I can, I just got to quickly do a screen share here.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can find it. Hold on. Right. Where is it? Oh, yes, here it is. This was my favorite thing. Do you got volume on that?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, cool. He just looks ridiculous when he dances. It's unbelievable.
Oh my goodness. Oh, he's got moves. He's got moves. I'm jealous. I'm a bit too white to dance, but it's good to know that this guy can. Holy.
I remember my high school dance.
Yeah. Oh, goodness gracious.
Oh, man.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
That was just...
There's a lot to unpack here.
All right. So we'll start right from the beginning, because the first thing, I knew things were bad because one thing I didn't know much about India, but I did know that the Prime Minister Modi at least would go to greet all the world leaders when they came into their country. And the second I heard that he was greeted by the Minister of Agriculture, I already was like, oh shit, this is going to be bad. And
well, he didn't even see...
Go ahead.
Sorry, continue.
Oh, no, you can go ahead.
He didn't even see Modi until, like, what, day 7 of the trip? But he did get the hug. He got the hug, so that's all that matters, right? Apparently, even though there were a few blunders in his trip, he did get the hug. So, I don't know if that means... I guess that's good.
but I still don't even know how he got that. Of all things, like, I mean, it can be insulting enough to bring your own chef to the country to cook Indian food, but once he invited that convicted terrorist, I can't believe that they just didn't say get the fuck out of our country right now. Like, he actually tried to assassinate like an Indian member, a politician or something back in the 80s.
Yeah, it's complete insanity, and I know the Sikh separatism movement in India is quite a hot button issue there, and the Trudeau government has been criticized as being too lenient with Sikh separatism even before this trip, and then for him to, well, not him, I suppose, but the member of parliament that invited this guy along, it's absurd. How does this happen?
And I think actually it could be said that that Sikh separatist, the extremism that's going on, it's even just it's very prominent in Canada, because one thing that when he won the NDP federal leadership, I started looking into Jagmeet Singh a little more, and that's when I found out that India wants nothing to do with them because he's refusing to disavow the Air India bombing from, I think, 1982, where like 200 Canadians were killed and a couple hundred more Indians were killed, and he was like refusing to disavow that. So I think they have every reason to be suspicious of this sort of sentiment that is in our country right now. Because I got to say, if that was breeding Quebec's extremism, if they were breeding Quebec extremism, I would be very pissed off right now.
Yeah, no, I know where you're coming from. And I was just last night, I heard that Singh actually accused the asker of that question. He called them racist. He said, "Oh, because I'm Indian, you think I have some sort of affiliation with these people? You're racist for asking this question." And it's, well, your Sikh identity has been a large, I don't want to say talking point, but it's certainly been a component of you getting elected. So I don't think I think it's kind of baiting him to ask him about something that happened, over 30 years ago, I guess. But for him to just not disavow terrorism just in any form is kind of suspicious to me. I shouldn't say suspicious, it's weird.
Well, the thing is, too, is when he was running, he himself was running on the fact that he was Sikh. He was kind of like playing the whole, I don't know if Canada's ready for a leader with a turban on and stuff like that. So he was playing that up throughout the whole leadership race. As soon as he jumped in, he was just playing the Sikh card immediately. And then, yeah, I remember that. I don't even know if there really is a Sikh card, but playing the Sikh card. And then, yeah, I remember hearing about that. He said, like, it's racist that you would even say that to me. So it's pretty clear to me that Jagmeet Singh is just another Trudeau. In fact, the only thing I would say is more concerning about him than Trudeau is that he says that Trudeau's policies don't go far enough.
Yeah, it is worrying. I would really, really hope that Canada doesn't see more identity politics happening in the future. I think it's almost inevitable at this point. I don't want us to get to the point where the States is right now, where it's just so polarized. I think Canada does have a lot more unity. And I think cultural identity and diversity and multiculturalism has been it's been fundamentally a part of Canada. It has. I think anyone who says otherwise is lying. It's
especially definitely over the last few decades, for sure.
Oh, of course.
That stuff. Yeah, for sure.
As I think the real turning point was when we had Trudeau Senior. And but Canada has always been a multicultural nation. I have no problems with multiculturalism. I think it's awesome. I think it's beneficial in many facets, as well as there's obviously drawbacks, as there is to anything in life. I think we found a good balance with it, and I just really, really hope that Canada doesn't become like the States, where it's such a polarizing topic right now. I'd really hope we can just move past race and just, like, who cares, man? Like, who cares?
Well, there's something that I don't know if you know the guy, but Dennis Prager from Prager.
Oh, yeah.
He says, I know one of his famous lines is he says, "There is only one race, the human race."
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I'd like to see that be true too. And I don't think it's wrong for people to have a little bit of their own like identity and culture, like have a little bit of pride in there. But we are seeing from the States that there is a lot of, yeah, right. There's a lot of polarization. We see the rise of the alt-right. We see the rise of Antifa and the far left, and they're just constantly butting heads when they don't even seem like they can really, anytime that they have agreed to come down and have a talk together, it's never gone well. I know Andy Worski has done a stream or two when he's tried to bring the far left and the far right together, and those always turn to a shit show. So I hope you're right. Although the one thing that I'm worried about is I feel like Trudeau is giving rise to the far right, because ever since he's come into office, I've been hearing a lot more of like groups like in Quebec, there's La Meute, I think it's called. And then, yeah. And there's I've been hearing more groups about that. So, but I feel like the main problem right now with that is more to do that Justin Trudeau is going a little too extreme on the other side, because he's saying things like there's no such thing as a Canadian identity and things like that. So that can be a problem. And then I know he said in the past that he's like, it's Canadians, it's the job of Canadians to adapt to Islam, not the other way around, things like that. So that's where I think the problems are coming with multiculturalism right now. I'm not a closed borders type guy. Like a couple of the guys that I talked to on the other stream, like they would like maybe not completely close the borders, but I know one guy that I talked to, Tom, he says that like he would want maybe like you bring people in, you close the borders down for 10, 15 years, then you bring more people in. I'm not exactly like that, but I will admit I would like to see a reduction in immigration just right now, because I feel that we're not really focusing on our citizens.
Yeah, that's understandable. I can see where you're coming from. I think I take a bit of a different stance. I'm pro-immigration. I think Canada actually has possibly the best immigration system in the world, where in order to get Canadian citizenship, it's all merit based, right? And it's actually very difficult to get Canadian citizenship, and it's almost completely based on merit. I think Canada does it better than any other Western nation. I'm pro-immigration. I think there's a lot of value that can be added from people who are just from any given country that are well educated. They know what they're doing, and they can help us with our Canadian cause, right? If they want to be part of Canada, heckin' A rights, buddy. You do it, man. And I remember this so vividly. I was pretty young. I don't know if you're a hockey fan.
Yep.
Or not. Yeah. So back when the Vancouver Canucks went to the Stanley Cup against Boston, I remember. I think. Yeah, I remember seeing tons of Sikh guys with Vancouver Canucks jerseys and turbans on, and like that's awesome. That's what I want, man. That's what I want with multiculturalism. You have people coming from other nations, they have their cultural values, they have their traditions, and they're embracing the larger cultural values of Canada. That's ideal, man. That's sweet. That just warms my heart to see.
That I will agree with. Whenever I do see people that come from other countries, they say like, I want to be Canadian. Like, I love this country, and, I want to work hard to be a Canadian. That really does make me feel good too, because then it makes me feel like I'm living in a country that the rest of the world, is at least somewhat idolizing. They want to be here. I do like that a lot too. Again, though, like where we do see some problems is like, I would say like, right now, as we're seeing groups that are coming together and they create their little areas, but they're not really branching out in a lot of ways. Like this would be sort of what a Chinatown is like, because like, or
so Vancouver then.
Yeah, I remember hearing a joke one time where somebody said like that they're going to change the name from Vancouver to Honcouver or something like that. Yeah, I remember that one.
Richmond is it's a little city that's right close to Vancouver. You can get there through public transit. It's really close to Vancouver, and it's majority Chinese. Vancouver in the next 10 years is going to see a complete demographic change where the majority of the citizens are Chinese. Like there's no and if or buts about it. We've seen tons of young people flee the city just because the housing prices are so astronomically high because of all these foreign investors just buying up property left, right, and center. And it's going to become basically Chinatown, the city, which I'm not. I have problems with that. I don't know, but at the end of the day, I mean, I don't think you should restrict people from buying property. I have a problem if they're doing it for investment and there's no one like living in the house. But I think once you get to the point where the government is mandating who can buy property and who can, that's a bit of a it's a bit of a scary slope to start on.
I can understand that. Actually, then you said because you're pro-immigration, so I actually had two questions for you.
Yeah.
The first one was, do you think then with a lot of immigration, like for instance over in Vancouver, you could see a political shift? Because I do know that a lot of like right now, that's for China, it's a communist country, so it's possible you could see a lot more of a left-wing bias coming in from there. And the other one was, what are your thoughts on the recent immigration changes where they loosened it to allow people with medical issues to come in?
On the first one, I don't know if Vancouver could get any more lefty than it already is, but from what I've seen, most of there's not really a big penetration of Chinese culture into mainstream Vancouverite culture that I have seen. They tend to self-segregate, and I'd be lying if I had really said I'd noticed a political difference. I know a lot of the people, well, a majority of the Chinese people that are coming in have made their billions of dollars through the kind of weird faux capitalism system they've got going on in China right now. So I would just assume that they'd be more pro free market just because that's how they've made all their billions of dollars. But I don't have any valuable insight on that, to be honest with you. I don't. That second one's tricky because I don't know if you should bar people from immigration just because they have some sort of underlying medical issue. That's even though we do have a socialized healthcare system where everyone's going to get treated, I don't know if that's a good prerequisite to just completely ban people from leaving the country on. Because I mean, you can, like, what about Stephen Hawking, man? Guy's brilliant. Would we let him in? Oh, sorry, dude, you're kind of crippled, so we're just not going to let you in. I think it should be taken on a case by case and like basis, as I think most things should be. I hate both the left and the right are really bad for this, just making sweeping generalizations. And yeah, sure, there's trends and everything, but when you're talking about nuanced social issues, you need to take it by a case basis. I don't care what anyone says; it needs to be on the individual level. There's too many outliers in any given group of people that you can just paint everyone with a broad brush. But then,
go ahead.
Sorry, but then again, if you don't want people to be coming to Canada just for our healthcare system if they're not going to be contributing members of society. However, I'm a little more lenient just because Canada does have these stringent immigration laws. I think that we're just not going to be letting in just completely useless people who have a bum knee and aren't going to be able to do any work, or they're just here to abuse the healthcare system. I don't know. It's a bit of a nothing burger in my opinion. I don't think people should be barred from entering our country if they have some sort of underlying health condition. But you do have to take into consideration people might come here to try and abuse it.
Well, what you were kind of talking about there, where you're saying like it needs to be taken on a more individual basis. I don't know if you ever listened to the guy, but I like listening to Sam Harris's podcasts. And one thing that he said when it was Charles Murray, I think, they were discussing race and IQ.
Oh boy.
Well, what Sam Harris said on that, which I thought was very well said, he says, regardless of what the results say, he says that if you are going to then make a sweeping judgment against an individual based on these factors, it's highly illogical, because just because, say, there's a standard doesn't mean that everybody's going to fall in that field, for instance. So I definitely agree with what you say. Maybe it should be taken on a more case-by-case basis. But if that were, for me, I think if that was the case, then it wouldn't really be necessary to make the changes to the immigration system, because if they were still looking like they'd be productive but might need some more medical treatment, I feel like we'd still be willing to take them in based on that.
Yeah, no, I understand completely. I agree with that. And for the bell curve is a pretty polarizing theory. I don't know if I would call it a theory, but I mean, the main thing people don't ever consider is there's more difference within a group than there is between groups, right? Like,
I think they said that too. Yeah, there is a lot of differences in between groups than between groups. So yeah, like I agree that we can't necessarily take that and just like make a blanket statement, which that is some problems I see on both sides for sure. that I've seen. I've seen the right, like one thing, like I've been somebody that will speak out against, like I think Islam can be quite violent and dangerous at times, but at the same time, I do not agree at all when people are going to make blanket statements against Muslims in that regard because of that. Because at the same time, I have met plenty of Muslims who don't hold extremist views. So just to then make that blanket statement, I don't agree with. So I understand completely with what you're talking about on that.
Yeah, specifically about the Islam thing, I think one of the biggest disservice everyone in the mainstream media does is they conflate Muslims with Islam, whereas Islam is a set of ideas and Muslim people are just people that happen to be of that faith. I don't like Islam as a set of ideas. I'll say that right now. I think it's pretty archaic and backwards. I don't know if just the set of ideas is compatible in a free Western society. But I mean, yeah, I've met plenty of Muslims that are totally fine people. I don't judge a book by its cover, right?
A good example of this is Imam Tahiti, he's a full-blown Muslim, like he is an imam, registered and everything, yet he too will come out and speak about what he sees as the problems of it. So that's a perfect example of how you can't just judge a book by your cover, I would say, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Now I was going to say that you, for your couple of videos, you seem to put interest into the legalization of marijuana. So I was curious as to where that came from for you.
Oh boy. Well, when I was younger, I used to smoke a lot of pot. I was a big fan of that. So I was always legalize it, man. 420 blaze it. And then I don't smoke pot very often anymore. But I've taken kind of a more libertarian approach to all sorts of drugs. I think they should all be legalized and regulated. If you just look at the shocking opioid crisis in Vancouver, where there's over 1,000 deaths a year, man, it's ridiculous. That's like 3 a day. It's absolute insanity. And for a city with like 7 million people, like that's shocking. And I think that this could almost just completely be eliminated if you just sell heroin in a designated heroin store, so you know you're not getting fentanyl laced in it. You know the dosage. You know you're not getting any rat poison mixed in. So it just seems like a benefit to all of society. Plus, you're not going to get these crazy gangs making exorbitant amount of money from selling drugs. And plus, you save money on the ridiculous war on drugs. The war on drugs has been one of the most expensive wars of all time, and it's just created nothing but havoc and just communal division. It's just absolutely disgusting how we can sit in this day and age and say, yeah, we need to keep doing this. I just can't get behind that at all. So that's why I'm particularly excited about marijuana being legalized in Canada. I think I hope it's a good stepping stone to the legalization or at least decriminalization of all other narcotics. It's looking like latest news is that it's probably not going to hit that July 1st legalization date. Just not enough resources. We need to train more police officers to effectively target people who are driving while under the influence of marijuana. A really, really interesting interview I heard the other day was with a police officer who had been in service for 30 years, and he was specifically trained to target drivers who were under the influence of narcotics. And he said that not a single person so there's a difference between driving under the influence, which is usually attributed to alcohol, versus the charge of it's called driving under drug. And there has not been a single conviction for the driving under drug case, just because you cannot, without a reasonable doubt, prove that people were high on marijuana while driving. And so that is kind of worrying that there's no real viable detection of people driving under the influence of pot right now in place when we're moving towards legalization. But I mean, people have driven stoned far more often than they've driven drunk, I would assume. I mean, I remember back in my marijuana smoking days, I never smoked and drove, but like the joke would be like, oh yeah, man, someone smokes a joint before they drive and they're just gonna go 10 clicks under the speed limit. Like it's just, it's a completely different mindset people take towards driving stoned versus driving drunk. But sorry, go.
Oh, I was just going to say that in terms of what you were talking about, there's not a good way to to tell if somebody is driving under the influence. One thing that I always found was concerning about the rules for that cops can have in the United States is that if they say they smell marijuana in your car, then that's enough for them to be able to search your car. But I don't like that, just because what's stopping a cop from going, oh yeah, I just happen to smell marijuana in your car? Hell, we've seen enough videos of cops that have planted evidence on people because they could, whether it was meaning to meet their quota or something. So I definitely understand when you say that there's not really a good means to detect it, as well as there's very suspicious ways in handling the marijuana right now.
Yeah, and as far as I'm aware, it's not going to be that way in Canada, because you can have a passenger who smoked a joint in the car while you're driving, and as long as you're not stoned, you're fine. So that's a bit of an interesting take. I don't know if you're aware of the public laws for smoking pot, but it's looking like, in my home province, anyways, you can smoke a joint anywhere you can smoke a cigarette, which is kind of, I don't like that. I think it should be treated more like alcohol than cigarettes. You shouldn't be able to smoke a joint while walking down the street, even though everyone in Vancouver always does forever, and it'll always be that way. I think it should be. I've always been the type of guy to say, what you do behind closed doors, I don't care. Doesn't affect me. Doesn't bother me. But I mean, I can't really, in good conscience, say that, yeah, we should have it legal. You can just smoke anywhere you want. Like, well, obviously, other than like parks and stuff, I guess, where you can't smoke cigarettes. It should be treated more like alcohol, in my opinion, there. And of course, there's differences between being stoned and being drunk. Being drunk people are far more annoying, more likely to cause havoc. I don't know are you aware of the big 420 celebration that goes on in Vancouver every year?
I've heard a little bit about it, but not too much.
Okay, so it's this huge marijuana party at the art gallery. I think it's at the art gallery. It used to be. I don't know if it still is or not. And thousands of people go, right? Like, it's crazy. And the only time violence has ever been recorded there has been a guy who's been drunk, not stoned, right? So obviously, I'm a little more lenient with people being stoned in public per se, but I don't know if we should allow smoking in public. I think we should make that distinction. I don't think it's good if you can just smoke a joint on the street and have kids walk by, and I can't get behind that, man. I just don't like that. I don't want someone to shoot up heroin on the side of the street either. It's gross. I don't want that.
Well, we have I do have the law pulled up right here from Ontario.ca, and there are a few differences between us, because we are handling ours a little more like alcohol. Like I see here, is only permitted to use recreational cannabis in a private residence, not to be allowed to use recreational cannabis in any public place, a workplace, or a motorized vehicle. So we are handling ours more like the like alcohol in here. They're not going to be sold in the same place. Like I can't remember what the acronym is for you guys for your liquor stores, but ours is the LCBO.
Yeah, and the old LC.
Yeah, and that they're saying that it won't be sold in the same stores. They'll be handled under the LCBO, but it's going to be completely different stores that'll be selling them. So that's a little bit different there, I guess.
Yeah, that seems like a better approach, in my opinion.
Well, the other thing you were saying is how you said, like, usually you find that people are drunk when this sort of violence breaks out. I completely agree, because when I was a teenager, I had a group of friends, and, you know, when we got drinking, like, I wasn't really a bad drunk. I've always been that drunk that just gets really happy and tired when they're drunk, but they could get very aggressive. And I remember we had one big guy, like, he was one of those guys that went to the gym 2-3 hours a day, you know, 4 or 5 times a week. So he's a big dude. And when he got drinking, he got aggressive and angry, and he would hurt you without even meaning to, you know? He would just go to smack you on the back, but then all of a sudden he would just smack you really hard. And the difference was when he would smoke weed, completely opposite. He was a teddy bear. You couldn't piss him off. You couldn't do anything. He was just all like, I'm just happy you guys are my friends, you know? But when he was drinking, you watched the fuck out. You didn't want to be around him. So, and I've seen that so many times with people with alcohol too. I've had way more bad experiences with alcohol than I ever have with marijuana. And it may not be the best argument for it, but for me, if we're going to allow people to buy alcohol, which has a lot of bad health effects, smoke cigarettes, which have even worse health effects, then how can you sit there and then say that marijuana is the terrible gateway drug? Because in my experience, alcohol is the gateway drug. Everybody I knew started off with drinking over smoking weed.
Yeah, fair enough, man. I mean, how many people do you know that have a couple drinks and then they want to get an 8-ball, right? Like it's definitely a gateway drug. I think the gateway drug argument can be made for marijuana in a black market economy, where if you have to go to some sketchy guy in an alleyway to buy a joint, then you're more likely to encounter him offering you mushrooms, and then maybe you get into some acid. Hell, why not throw some MDMA in there too, right? Why not? If you're all getting it from the same guy, you just make one trip, right?
Exactly.
So I could see that argument, but I don't know. I think people have enough agency to decide what's right for themselves, and I don't think the government should have any say in it.
That's very libertarian of you.
Yeah, people can make up their own decisions. We live in an information era where anything you could ever want to know about drugs is available online. You can properly know how much you should take, unless you're getting it from these sketchy back alley dealers that are cutting it with other sorts of drugs. It's so ridiculous to me. We have the information system where people can responsibly even do drugs like heroin, for fuck's sakes, but you're getting all these people dying left, right, and center because it's cut with other shit. So if we just regulated it and completely took away the criminal aspect, takes money away from gangs, have relatively safe heroin. Obviously, it's a crapshoot every time you do smack if you're going to die or not. But I think there's so many ways. If the government is really looking to protect its citizens, then this just seems like a really obvious way to do it. I don't know. That's my 2 cents on it, man.
Well, on top of that is because if you're going to get arrested and thrown into prison over marijuana, chances are you're going to come out a much more violent criminal, considering of how our prison system is these days. So it seems kind of pointless to me to be throwing people in prison for that. And yeah, when going back to the war on drugs, I agree with you completely. I thought the war on drugs was terrible because it only actually more drugs started flowing in. It created more of a vacuum for it because as they started removing certain leaders in certain groups, all of a sudden smaller groups were coming out and flooding the street with even more. And the laws that were put in against users were ridiculous. Like as I've gotten, like, ever since he came out of office and I've made more transition to the right, I've actually have looked back on some of Harper's policies and realized that, at least I personally think that they were better than I realized at the time when I was younger. But one thing that I still to this day didn't like that he did is he strengthened the crimes for weed laws, because I remember few years ago, there was a kid who met up with his buddy just outside of a school just to pass him a joint, just a small little joint. They got caught by the cops, and he got 18 months in prison because he gave a joint to his buddy on what they were saying was school property and I think they classify as where kids like to congregate.
Jesus.
And it was just for passing a joint to his buddy. He wasn't a drug dealer or anything like that. So these drug laws, I completely agree that they're very draconian in that way. That being said, I wouldn't say I'm necessarily would go as far as you. There's certain drugs that I still wouldn't want to see necessarily legalized. Like, I don't know. I don't really think that PCP or crystal meth necessarily would be a good thing to legalize. But in terms of marijuana, I've always been more of a decriminalization person. If they want to go legalized, okay. And I think I could definitely go, like, if people want to talk about mushrooms and talking about decriminalizing that, or at least lowering sentence on that, I'd be okay on that too, because I know it's more of a natural psychedelic. I don't know when we get into a little bit of the harder drugs, though, but I do understand what you're talking about when you say that it does cause, like, it causes people to cut it with dangerous drugs, and it does cause a lot of people. It causes these gang violence and wars between them. So I can't say that I know necessarily what the solution would be then.
Yeah, it's understandable. And just going back to psychedelics here briefly, I think obviously I fully support mushrooms being legalized. I would really be interested in seeing magic mushrooms and other psychedelics being used for psychotherapeutic reasons, because I've seen a lot of really persuasive data that has showed magic mushrooms and ecstasy has helped so many people get through PTSD and I think there might be some sort of therapeutic value for those sorts of things. Now, I don't necessarily agree with people taking psychedelic drugs to just, you know, conk out, right, and just get super high. But I think if we legalize these drugs anyways, and then we would have a lot more leeway to experiment with them for medical purposes. And I have seen some pretty convincing data that shows there are some valuable applications of psychedelics in the medical community. So I would just love to see more information on that.
I can't say I've seen the data, but I have been hearing that more and more, that people are starting to experiment with psychedelics and hallucinogens in order to help people deal with their trauma. And yeah, actually, the one thing I had heard where that was successful was with veterans that came back with PTSD from war zones, especially. So yeah, I actually think that could be definitely worth something at least researching into, at the very least, to see if there's benefit there. I mean, there's a lot, of course, with drugs, there's some bad shit that comes with it, but if we're using it in the right means and the right dosage, then they can actually be very beneficial. In fact, a lot of the times, they think a lot of the inspirations in ancient times came from hallucinogenic drugs. I know when they're talking about Moses, when he brought down the 10 Commandments and everything, they make reference to the burning bush, and some people believe that this was some sort of psychedelic drug that Moses took, and then that's where he had his image of the 10 Commandments, blah, 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 blah. That's just one theory that's there. But yeah, no, I've definitely heard a lot about psychedelic drugs and how they could actually be beneficial and helpful to people.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of freaky stuff about DMT and just how similar everyone's trips are, and they talk to interdimensional beings, and it's freaky, man. I don't miss me with that. I don't want to experience that. That would freak me right out. But who knows? Maybe there's some merit. Maybe we can communicate through God with psychedelics.
Who the hell knows?
Yeah, crazy.
I mean,
things have happened, I'm sure.
I'll be honest. Like, I personally am an atheist, so I don't believe in God. I don't know what your position on it is.
Yeah, I'm an agnostic Christian, I guess.
Okay, so you'll at least believe that, like, maybe the morality of Christian, or the philosophies of Christian.
Yeah, I really agree with a lot of Christian and Catholic values, I suppose. Not like, I don't know, not more the social ones, but I have you seen Jordan Peterson's his biblical talks?
I have seen a few of those for sure, yeah.
Yeah, I've derived a lot of meaning from those, and I thought, wow, that's actually very applicable to real life. And I do think that traditional Christian values are good, but I can't I don't have any faith in a God. I can't pretend I do. I just don't believe.
I would say that it was Jordan Peterson that it was a hard pill to swallow, but he was the one that kind of made me realize about, at least when we're talking about secularism or atheist stance, about the problem with moral relativity. So he was the one that kind of showed me that, because one thing as I thought about it, I was like, even if you don't necessarily say agree with all the rules in Christianity, the one thing that it did is that it made an objective morality that people had to follow, and it couldn't be circumvented. Even if you die, you will be judged at the end of your life. So live a good life, live by these rules. And it kept everyone on the same page. So that was a tough pill for me to swallow. For me personally, I would say that most of my fight against religion has to do with organized religion. I don't really like the church. I don't like the mosque or the temple. I find that's where most of the crap comes from. But on a more personal basis, I really don't. It doesn't bug me if anybody believes in God or if that's the way they want to find stuff. But that was the tough pill for me to swallow, was the values and the morals that came along with the religious doctrine.
Yeah, no, for sure. I definitely agree with you on the organized religion part. I mean, just look at how corrupt Catholicism has been for, Jesus, man, like the past 20 centuries. Like, for as long as it's existed, it's been inherently corrupt. Like, I can't get behind that. And I think if power concentrates in any sort of sense like that, it's gonna corrupt. Power corrupts absolutely, right?
Damn right. And the other thing is too, is I have noticed, which isn't true, I guess, for everyone on the secular side or atheist side, but it does seem to be a large demographic. They do go towards the more left-wing, bigger state system without going against when they're not religious, which I don't know if this is because it's just the left has offered more of a platform for seculars and non-believers, or whether this has more to do with more to do with trying to offset the problems of society. But what do you think about that? Why do you think that more atheists and non-believers go toward the left wing, bigger state politics?
Well, I think that the right is obviously more based in tradition, and so tradition and religion goes hand in hand for fairly self-evident reasons, I would think. And so I think I don't know if this is just my personal experience, but I had always seen the right growing up. I had always seen the right as like Christian fundamental loonies, right? Like there was no, I didn't view the like I didn't consider libertarianism or
they were all the
anarchism.
same.
It was all just like the old white Christian guy, right?
Yeah.
Who, like basically my whole view of the right was the neocons. And so and so I think that's probably in my view of it anyways, that's probably why more secular people go to or more atheist people go to the left. And then I think there probably is some correlation between individualism, which is more focused around religion, I suppose, and atheism and collectivism, which you see has gone hand in hand for the past, I don't know, however long atheism has been a thing. Like if you look at almost all communist dictatorships, they've all been atheists, right? So I think there's a pretty positive correlation there. I don't know if it's which comes first, chicken or egg, but it just seems that it's just such a fundamental divide between the left and the right. The right is traditional and Christian, and the left is non-traditional, shall we say, and more atheist, more agnostic.
In terms of the communism thing, one thing that I've been theorizing with is that atheism wasn't so much like, again, Marx himself was an atheist, so I think there is something to it. But I think when it comes to communism, I think the main use for atheism had to do with control, just because in those areas, it seemed to be that the church was still very dominant. Like in Russia, the Russian Orthodox Church was very dominant. So right now I'm kind of going on the theory that atheism was more used for the control rather than it was actually a real driving point for communism. Because the one thing I've noticed too is in certain areas when morale got low, like for instance in Russia during when the Nazis were invading them, when morale was really low, Stalin and the other communist leaders were actually like willing to allow the churches to open back up and for people to go congregate there. So that's what I think it may have to be, but there might be some there has to be something more in that. That wouldn't be the only thing. I do think you're right when you talk about more community collectivism that comes with the atheism. But again, at the same time, when I think about it, I don't know what it would be, because there's nothing really when you say like you don't believe in God or anything that says like, well, now like congregate in a community, you know?
Yeah. I also don't think we should overlook the specifically with communism, the state is your God. The state provides your human rights, whereas with people on the right, God provides your rights, right? So I think I don't know if this was a conscious shift for the commies, but I think the state did replace religion as a god, essentially.
Oh, you know what? When you put it that way, that does make a little more sense. Like when you say that the rights derive from God, and then on the other side, they're looking to get the rights derived from the state. That actually does make a lot of sense when you put it that way, because if you're not getting it from God, then you need someone else who can put those rights in place and those freedoms in place, because we're talking about communism. But yeah, actually, when you put it that way, that does start to make a little more sense to me when you put it that way.
Yeah, I just wish we could really embrace secular ethics, right?
I think the real problem is that secularism changed too quickly. Is that it was willing to throw away traditionalism with it, and that we got too far away from religion and God too quickly. Because over the course of history, we've always changed slowly, but these last few decades have just been ramped up. The change that happens in our society have ramped up so much that I think that might be what it is that it's just people these days are just throwing the baby out with the bathwater, essentially.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomb killer. Not for his killings, obviously, but his manifesto I thought was just absurdly brilliant. Like, oh my God, that guy is insanely smart. And one thing he said is it's impossible to maintain traditionalism when you have a technologically advanced society that is increasingly doubling its technological capabilities. Which makes sense. You can't just have a traditional society when everything around you is rapidly changing, right?
Yeah, very true. And yeah, actually, that's a brilliant point that was put forward, and it sounds exactly like that might be the case. But although I will admit, I haven't read the Unabomber's manifesto yet, so maybe that's be something, a bit of reading material I'll go do after this. But
Oh, it's tremendous. It's really good.
all right, awesome. I'll go check that out. I'm really sorry. I actually got a couple things I got to do, so I'm going to have to take off. But this was a lot of fun, and I want to do this again with you sometime
Yeah,
soon.
for sure. Let's do it.
Well, you were talking about you'd be more interested in starting to stream on a more regular basis, eh?
Yeah, weekly, bi-weekly, whatever it is, man.
Okay, sounds good. Right now, this week, I've been on Reading Week from school, so I'll be back at school next week. But
Okay.
we'll keep talking, and then we'll figure out a more regular basis when we can, like a day or something that and same time, and we'll get together and we'll do this maybe on a more weekly basis or something, or a bi-weekly basis.
Heckin' rights. Let's do it up.
All right, perfect. Thanks for joining me, Top Leaf.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All righty, I'll talk to you soon, okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, bye.